What is the grossest act of revenge you've ever played a part in? I used to be a cocktail waitress. And for some reason guys would automatically think that because I worked at a bar, they could grab pinch fondle me. I reported it a few times. Because many would slap pinch so hard there'd be bruises. Nothing changed. I was pretty much told to deal with it. Well, I thought that was bullshit. So I sewed tacks into some boy short underwear. Pointy side facing out. Completely covering my ass. Whenever someone grabbed slapped my behind, they got pricked by a ton of little needles. I ended up getting in trouble for it. Which I thought was stupid. But I'm pretty sure that it was one of my best ideas to date. TLDR, I made assholes stab themselves. Covered an entire floor in shaving cream. Except for a series of carefully placed stepping stones that we covered in KY. Then waited in the apartment below. It worked perfectly. Victim jumped to the first KY patch. Fell over and slid through the shaving cream. Had a huge disagreement with my bank a few years ago. They were totally wrong. Refused to admit it or refund the costs that I incurred. So I went to the grocery store and bought a huge piece of fish. Then went to said bank. And put the fish into my safety deposit box. Went into the bank a couple of times in the next week or two. You could smell something fishy but it was not overpowering. However, about a week later I got a phone call from the bank asking me to come in. When I entered the bank it stunk to high heavens in there. The manager, who had goofed me during the prior disagreement, was there having a few other people open their safety deposit boxes. My turn to open mine. The stench was awful. I open it up and sure enough there is a piece rotted fish in it. The manager screamed at me, "You put a piece of fish in your safety deposit box?" I said, "Hey pal, do you know the price of salmon these days?" Told him to get the duck out of my way and walked out. I felt a little bad that I inconvenienced other safety deposit box holders. But it was so worth it. Take that CIBC. Not my story. But an old maintenance guy from my old apartment complex. He heard that many cars were being broken into and he had just bought a new Jeep. Within a week, the Jeep was broken into. So he replaced his windows. Filed a police report and called it good. The next week, however, he walked outside and saw that his windows were broken out again. He got everything repaired and did the same thing with the police report and all. He ended up buying a new radio that probably had the latest and greatest tape player. But he knew that break-ins were still occurring in his neighborhood. This is when he thought to tape razor blades underneath the stereo in the rear so when someone grabbed it, it would slice their fingers. Within a week, he walks outside and realizes his window is broken out again. But he remembered that he taped the razor blades to the stereo. So he walks up to his Jeep and describes it as a crime scene. He said there was blood everywhere along with a blood trail on the sidewalk from the person that broke in. But his stereo was still there. No one ever dealt with his Jeep again. He said he still felt really bad for it. But he got to keep his radio. I was a geeky, ostracized kid for most of my childhood. And one guy in particular liked to make my life miserable. During the 3rd grade he would pinch me, throw sand in my eyes, destroy my schoolwork and harass me verbally. I put up with it because I didn't believe in violence. And because showing a reaction would have been admitting defeat. Until one day, at lunch, I heard him bragging to his friends that he'd microwaved a hamster to death. Just to hear it scream. He then began laughing hysterically as he described the pitiful sounds it made before it died. My patience with him ended. It was one thing for me to deal with his bullshit. But I couldn't stand by while he tortured small animals. So I tapped his shoulder. Waited until he turned around. And ecked him hard enough to make something crunch in his face. He made a strangled sound and fell backward onto the bench. Instead of fighting back, he blinked and looked utterly baffled by the blood on his hands. I stood over him long enough to make eye contact. Pick on someone your own size, or I will hurt you badly. Then I walked away. I lived in fear of retribution from the teachers for weeks. But he never told on me. I think he must have been embarrassed that a nerdy kid turned his face to meat. From that point on, he stopped harassing me. I don't know if he stopped hurting animals. TLDR, I punched the lights out of a sadistic bully after I overheard him talking about microwaving small animals. When I was in first grade, I was taking a piss in a urinal at the private, mostly Jewish, school I went to. I was minding my own business when the school bully grabbed me by the shoulder and pushed me into the urinal. In the confusion, I ended up turning around with my little member hanging out for the world to see. Being that I am uncircumcised in a mostly Jewish school, the bully and his posse started to point and laugh at my sheathed sword. So I bit the tip of his finger off. I was promptly expelled. There was this scumbag Steve that was friends with my neighbor, who was also a well-off mad at his parents' little thug. Well, this scumbag Steve fellow thought it was funny to throw a basketball at my dad's work van. My dad witnessed this through the window and ran out to check on the damage. The scumbags take off running and my father inspects the dents they left on the back door of his vehicle. He's fuming mad. But the kid's parents are out of town for the weekend. Cut to 10:30 that night. And these punks are wasted. It was just the two of them, drinking the one kid's dad's beer. Scumbag Steve is passed out in the backyard and the neighbor boy asked us to help carry him inside. My little brother and I walk over and drag Steve into their basement and the neighbor goes and passes out too. That's when my brother devises and coordinates that most deprived human act I've ever witnessed. He sheets in a plastic bag and proceeds to unload the contents of said plastic bag into the back of Scumbag Steve's sagging sweet pants. Scumbag Steve never spoke a word about it. He thinks he sheet himself to this day. My neighbor is in jail for 6 counts of burglary now. My cousin's ex-husband worked at a factory where there was one asshole. His name was Manuel, who was notorious for getting into people's lunches and eating what he wanted out of them. These were big blue-collar guys who often brought 2 or 3 sandwiches. So Manuel would eat a sandwich or 2 out of a couple of lunches every day as what he thought was a joke. One of his frequent victims didn't find it so funny. One day, the victim took a couple of slices of bread into the men's room with him and basically took a dump on one. Slapped a piece of lettuce on it. Put mustard and mayo on the other. Slid the works into a baggie. Put it into a brown sack. And stuck it in the fridge in the break room. Of course, Manuel got a hold of it. And while the guys who were in on the prank could barely keep a straight face as they all sat around the lunch table, he whipped out the sandwich and took a big bite. My cousin's ex said he never would have believed that a human being could actually turn the color green. But Manuel did. In fact, they had to call an ambulance and rush him to the hospital. So I guess Manuel got the last laugh. A paid sick week off. Unless you take into account his new nickname that stayed with him long after the incident, Manuel Sheet Sandwich. It was the beginning of the year. In early primary, elementary, school. And we were making A3 posters that were to decorate the school hall. As one may know, one of the worst crimes in this period of development is the eraser napper. The thief in question had my eraser more than I did. Cunningly I took my eraser and dipped the edge he had been using into some ink. Shortly after, a hand slithered across desk. My newly modified eraser was gone. Just as time wasn't used for permission. Time wasn't used to inspect the tool of destruction. The subsequent screams stalled class. In one act all heads rotated to one spot. To the carnage of my making. Anyway, I'm running out of time here. The day finished in about 2 minutes time and we had to hand in our posters. Till the end of term the result of my actions were plastered on a wall. A smear of black ink over said masterpiece. As a warning to all, never steal my eraser. Yesterday I found a huge centipede climbing my leg as I was drying off from my shower. So I covered that itch in soap. I haven't been messed with by a centipede since then. Submitted this in another thread. But I had a girlfriend who basically used me for every single essay she had to do for school and otherwise. She also borrowed money all the time and was an overall lich. She had me write her an admissions essay to use for trying to get into fashion school. Shortly after this, She broke up with me because I wouldn't give her a credit card so she could rent a van to visit some friends and do whatever else halfway across the country. I ended up emailing the admissions department of each of the schools and just saying that the essays were written by me and plagiarized. I then filled out her information online for every single medical certification school, you know those letters contact you pages. Because she had always said that medical assistant was her backup plan in life, but she hated the thought of it. Packed caviar in her curtain rods and raw shrimp behind her switch plates. She never found them, but accused me of burying a dead animal under her house. She had to sell at a $50,000 loss and move. I can only imagine the stench. This was a former boss who owed me $800 and dicked me around for 3 months with excuses. Never leave your house key under the mat. People had a crazy. We later found out she was a meth head landlord in a college town who rented a house to me and 3 other college guys. Older house. Not in great shape. But we didn't care. She would appear at 5 or 6 in the morning on Sat or Sun. Let herself in. And scream at us for hungover 19 to 21 year olds for the state of the place. She would shut off the power if the rent was 1 day late. Would forget to pay the water bill, which would get shut off about every other month. etc. When we moved out, we made sure that every access panel, switch plate, outlet plate, return air vent, and an attic access had raw chicken and or trout stuffed behind it. We also left open jars of peanut butter in the void beneath several cabinets to ensure a mouse problem. TLDR, crazy landlord harassed us. Made illegal surprise inspections. We made sure her house ended up smelling like a seafood restaurant dumpster. I used to work in a restaurant with a guy named Chuck. Chuck was a junkyard dog. He'd eat anything, even food off customers' plates. Anytime the kitchen would make food for the servers, he'd swoop in and eat half of it. I got sick of it. So one night I went into the back, got a lump of lard and rolled it in coconut. Then I stuck a shrimp tail on the end of it. I tossed it in the deep fryer until the coconut toasted. The perfect fake coconut shrimp. I sat it on a plate, told him it was a leftover from a table. He grabbed it and crammed it down his gullet. When he bit down, hot, white fat oozed out of his mouth. He was incredibly wary about eating sheet off plates from that day on. In high school I was FWB with a guy and we would have sex pretty often, always a condom, but one month I was late. Told my best friend. She told her boyfriend. And of course he told my FWB, silly me thought he was my boyfriend. In hindsight it was just me being used for sex. FWB disappears. Won't take my calls. Nada. I get my period. But say nothing for a month. June rolls around. His birthday is coming up and so is Father's Day. Always a sad time for him since his dad had skipped out on him at an early age. I decide when to strike and how. Bought one of those small plastic containers of chicken livers. Took it home. Chopped some up. Put it in a gallon Ziploc. And poured in some bloody liquid for good measure. Then I make a card and put a message on it. Put the card in the bottom of a small box and set the bag on top of it. Throw in some blue wrapping tissue and wrap it nicely. Wait for a day when he isn't home, a nice hot day, and leave the gift on the steps in his carport. Wish I could have seen the look on his face with the bloody chunky bag in one hand and in the other hand a card which said Happy Father's Day. Love, your son. No one ducked with me in general. This only led to adding to the degree to which I was not ducked with. It became somewhat of a local urban legend. No internet back then to debunk and mess up my plan. I wasn't part of this, but worked with the person who was. Girl's husband was a real jerk. Cheated. Abused. etc. Girl decided to get revenge. She worked in the labor and delivery department and took care of newborns in the nursery. Over a course of a few weeks or so, she collected the discarded foreskin after each circumcision. Once she had enough collected, not sure how you can tell that, she cooked a soup for dinner for her husband. She said it was a Brunswick type stew. He, as she tells it, ate 2 bowls that night, and took the rest to work for lunch the next day. She later described how she could kill him by getting him passed out drunk, puking into a container, then using a sump tube to pump it back into his lungs, making it appear he aspirated on his own vomit. Far as I know, they are divorced now, and he's still alive. TLDR, woman feeds her husband a bunch of foreskin. Half of these revenges involve piss or sheet. What the hell is wrong with you all? My friend has milk behind his shed that will soon be dumped into an asshole's car. The milk has been there since March of 2010. I am very ashamed of this, but since you asked, as a teenager, we had a neighbor with a vicious dog that had bitten me several times. After the 3rd or 4th time that the animal bit me, I threw a couple poison-laced hot dogs over the fence. The dog died. Like I said, I regret every inch of it, but I can't change what I did. I was a freshman in college and my roommate was loose. She claimed to be a les and talked shit about men all the time, but slept with quite a few men anyways. I didn't judge though. That is until one day we had a get together with friends and discussion got a little TMI. I ended up admitting I was a virgin in the process. Now, my roommate couldn't let this information go. She made fun of my virginity almost daily and kept up comments like you need to get laid, like it would solve all my problems about insecurity. Blah blah blah. She tried setting me up with some homophobic douche-up. Oddly enough, but that just didn't fly with me. Then she crossed the line when she put a condom filled with lotion in my bed, and it stuck to my leg. And her friend blew up a fruit-flavored lubed condom and hit me in the face with it jokingly. But I was filled with repressed virgin rage. When she was gone for the whole weekend with one of her little duck buddies, I used her toothbrush to clean my computer keys. Very nasty computer keys. I also used it to clean the dusty window and my fish's bowl. I didn't commit a visible noticeable prank because I knew she would get revenge. And this just felt wonderful. TLDR slutty pseudo-les roommate gives me shit for being a virgin. I cleaned the room with her toothbrush. A guy I was dating and living with cheated on me with one of my co-workers one night, and I found out from a mutual friend as it was happening. Pretty much got a play-by-play. When he got home I confronted him about it and he hit me several times. I managed to get away and ran to a neighbor's and called the cops. The asshole obviously went to jail for the night, and I packed his sheet up. While packing his toiletries, I pissed on that Methodicus toothbrush. He came to get his things the next day and I handed the boxes over. He moved in with a mutual friend and I have it on good word that he used that toothbrush for like 6 months. In college, there was a guy who was the most annoying brick imaginable that lived in the dorms with us. We had words over something. Specifics don't matter. So a friend of mine and I decided one drunken night to show him what we thought of him. For days, we ate asparagus every day in the cafeteria. We pissed into empty milk jugs to save it. Then, while the brick was away, we took a cardboard tube, held it at an angle at the bottom of the door, and poured the piss down the tube. It gained momentum in the tube and rushed under his door, covering his floor in our foul-smelling piss.